I never imagined my life would feel this small. The bills were stacked like a wall. I couldn't climb rent overdue, lights, flickering fridge mostly empty. I was doing everything I could to hold on, but the ground beneath me kept slipping. Wasn't lazy, I worked hard. Every day, I showed up at the office, 10 minutes early, stayed, 20 minutes late, smiled through the weight of it all, but smiling didn't pay bills and responsibility, didn't write checks. It had been 4 months since my divorce, not the explosive kind, just a slow, quiet drifting away until one day he left, and the silence in the house never left with him. I thought I'd be okay. I always thought I was strong. But strength doesn't keep the heat on. And I was tired of being strong. I was tired of waking up to a cold apartment and colder mornings. The office was my only escape. It was a small firm, 10 people on a good day. But I liked the routine I liked. Feeling needed, even if it was just remembering birthdays or keeping things organized. My boss, Mr. Whitaker, was a quiet man, late 30s, serious always, buttoned up, the kind of person who noticed everything but said very little. We barely talked outside of work needs. He was professional, respectful, and entirely unreadable. That day I stayed late to finish organizing invoices. My mind was racing. My account was overdrawn again, and I had no idea how I was going to pay rent. It was the first of the month tomorrow. I felt the tears before I could stop them. Silent, frustrated, helpless tears, I sat there at my desk hoping the office would stay empty so I could fall apart without an audience. I didn't hear him come in, just the soft shuffle of shoes, and then, "Are you all right?" I wiped my face quickly, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Just tired," I said, hoping he'd nod and leave. But he didn't. He leaned on the edge of my desk, not in a condescending way, but casual, like he was inviting me to drop the act. "You've been holding a lot together," he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want pity. I didn't want to be anyone's charity case. "I don't mean to intrude," he said carefully. "But if there's anything I can do." There was something in his voice, gentle, not rehearsed. I wanted to trust it, but my pride stood in the way. "It's just rent," I blurted out. Before I could stop myself, "I'll figure it out." He paused. "I have something unusual to ask you." That got my attention. He hesitated, then said, "My parents' 50th anniversary is coming up in a few weeks. I've been trying toppling something, but honestly, I'm terrible at this kind of thing. You're the most thoughtful person I know. I was wondering if you could help me plan it." It blinked. "That wasn't what I expected," he continued. "I know it's personal and not part of your job, but I'd be happy to compensate you for your time privately. Consider it a side project if you're open to it." I didn't answer right away. Was this real? Not a handout, but an offer of trust of work I could do. And do well. It wasn't just the money. It was the dignity. The feeling of being seen as more than someone who was struggling. More than someone who needed help. I nodded slowly. "I can do that." He smiled. Then small, almost shy. "Thank you. It would mean a lot." That night, I walked home, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Nothing had changed. My account was still empty, my bills still unpaid. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I wasn't alone. Maybe life wasn't done surprising me. And deep down, buried beneath the exhaustion and fear, something stirred. Not hope exactly, not yet, but the idea of it. It started the next Monday. He cleared time in the evenings for us to meet after hours. At first, it was just lists, venues, guest catering options. I brought a notebook and colored pens. He brought spreadsheets and silence. We were two very different people trying to build something meaningful for someone else. But slowly, the rhythm formed. He wasn't cold, just careful with his words. I learned that. When he asked a question, he listened. Really listened. The first time I laughed, during one of our planning sessions, he looked at me like he hadn't heard laughter in a long time, and he liked the sound. As the days passed, our conversations began to stretch beyond the event. He told me about his parents, how they'd met in high school, started a small business together and stuck by each other through everything I want to give. Them a night that reflects their life, he said one evening. Something full of heart, I smiled. You mean something messy, chaotic, and unforgettable, he laughed. Really laughed, and it startled both of us, exactly. That planning the party became our shared mission. We debated menu ideas, music from the 70s, photo collages, and memory boards. One night I found a company that could recreate their wedding cake from a grainy old photograph. His face lit up. You really think of everything? He said. Softly. I shrugged suddenly. Shy details matter. One night as we sat side by side comparing floral arrangements, his hand brushed mine. Just a second, maybe less. But something passed between us. We both looked down, then looked away. Nothing was said, but everything shifted. We worked late that night, and the next, it wasn't just about the party anymore. It became the best part of my day. Those quiet hours where I wasn't just an employee, I was part of something I mattered. One evening we ordered takeout and stayed longer than usual. Between bites he told me about his last relationship. She left because he couldn't find the balance between ambition and affection. She said, I lived in spreadsheets. He said, trying to smile. I get it. I said, I used to be married to someone who stopped looking up from his phone long enough to see me leave. His eyes softened. How did you do it? Walk away? I didn't have a choice. It was either lose myself or lose the marriage. I picked me. He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he let on. You're strong. No, I said quietly, just tired of pretending silence. Settled between us again. But it didn't feel uncomfortable. It felt honest. That night, he walked me to my car. The air was cool, and I could see his breath when he spoke. I look forward to this. To a U.S. working together. I wanted to say I did too. I wanted to tell him that for the first time in years, I felt awake again, seen, appreciated, capable. But the words stayed stuck in my throat. Instead, I said, me too. By the second week, we were finishing each other's thoughts. He'd bring something, and I'd already have it on my list. I'd make a suggestion, and he'd already emailed the contact. There was an ease between us that had nothing to do with the party anymore. It was unspoken, but it filled the space between us like music without words. He came into the break room one morning with 2 coffees. I figured you could use a second cup. I took it with a surprised smile. Are you reading my mind now, just your routine? He said with a wink. That small gesture meant more than any bouquet of flowers ever could. It meant he noticed that I wasn't invisible. I caught myself watching him sometimes, the way he rolled up his sleeves, the way he smiled when something came together. He was handsome. Yes, but it was more than that. It was the way he carried himself, quiet strength, unforced kindness. And every time I caught him looking at me, he didn't look away. Not anymore. I wasn't foolish. I wasn't rushing toward anything. But something was growing between us. Something gentle, sincere. Something I hadn't let myself hope for in years. And I started to wonder not just about the party or the project, but what would happen when it was over. The anniversary arrived on a cool Saturday evening, the kind that whispers of beginnings. Everything was ready. The lights strung up in soft gold, the tables dressed in linen and roses, the photo wall arranged like a museum of love. Every detail we had poured our time into now stood as assolent witness to what we had built together. Guests began arriving just after 6. His parents stepped through the doors holding hands, their faces full of wonder. The music, the decor, the slideshow. We had captured their story. I watched from the side as his mother cried at the sight of her wedding cake replica, and his father held her a little closer. He stood beside me, his hand brushing Thesmol of my back. "You did this," he whispered. I shook my head. We did. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about bills or what came next. I was present. The moment felt like a breath I'd been holding finally released. Later in the evening, we took our seats, and I noticed how his gaze kept finding me across the room. There was something quiet and steady in it. Something unspoken that held weight. People smiled at us like they could see it too. Whatever it was, we weren't naming. Then came the toast. He stood at the mic glass in hand, looking nervous in a way I'd never seen. "Tonight is about my parents," he began, his voice clear. "But it's also about something else. About recognizing the people who hold us up when we don't even know we need it." He looked straight at me. This celebration wouldn't have happened without someone who reminded me what it means to care deeply, to show up, to listen. Someone who reminded me that love isn't just something we remember. It's something we choose every day. I felt the room melt away. There was only him and those words, and the way they wrapped around my chest. I didn't know what to do with all that emotion. I excused myself to the hallway, suddenly breathless. Moments later, he followed. "Did I say too much?" he asked. "No," I said. "You said everything." We stood insolence, hearts pounding louder than any music playing inside. He reached out, but not forcefully. Just a gentle touch to my arm. "I've been thinking about what happens when the party ends," he said quietly. And I realized I don't want this to end. I looked up at him. The question I'd been afraid to ask now, unavoidable. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I've never been more certain. You walked into my life when I wasn't looking for anything. But somehow, you became the thing I didn't know I was missing." I didn't answer right away. The weight of his words filled the space between us. My mind flickered with doubts. Was this just the glow of a shared project? The high of success? Or was it something more? But deep down I knew, because I felt safe when I was near him. I laughed. More stood taller, breathed deeper. This wasn't a rescue. It was a connection. We walked back inside, together, not touching, not speaking. But the air between us had shifted. People were dancing. His father winked at him. His mother hugged me like I was family. Then the song changed. An old ballad from the 70s. He extended his hand. "Dance with me." I took it. We didn't talk during the dance. We didn't need to. The way he held me said everything. Gentle, certain note rushed. I leaned into him and let myself feel what I'd been pushing away. For weeks, when the song ended, he didn't let go right away. "You feel like home," he whispered that night as the party wounded down and we collected leftover cake and folded tablecloths. I saw his parents dancing alone in the corner. 50 years of love, and still holding each other, like the world hadn't changed. I realized then that love doesn't always arrive in fireworks. Sometimes it shows up quietly through planning, a celebration through late-night conversations, through shared purpose. And sometimes when you think you're just trying to survive, life brings you someone who reminds you how to live. The days that followed felt like waking up in a different life. One where everything looked the same but carried a new kind of meaning. Monday morning came as it always did. But this time when I walked into the office, his eyes met mine. Not with polite acknowledgement, but with warmth. A quiet, shared understanding passed between us. Something had changed, and neither of us wanted to turn back. We didn't rush into labels or grand declarations. Instead, we let the connection deepen in its own time. We found new excuses to spend time together. coffee runs that turned into walks in the park, project updates that became hour-long talks about childhood memories, past heartbreaks, and favorite books. There was no pressure, no pretending, just two people rediscovering joy in the presence of each other. One Friday evening, as we sat side by side, in his office finishing up reports, he leaned back in his chair and asked, "When's the last time you did something just for you?" I thought about it. I can't even remember. I've been so busy just surviving. He smiled. Then let's change. That weekend, he planned a small getaway, a drive out to the coast, where the world slowed down. There was no itinerary, no rush, just quiet mornings, with coffee on a balcony, the sound of waves, shared glances that spoke, volumes, and laughter that came more freely with each passing moment. We talked about everything. What scared us, what we wanted, what we'd lost. He admitted how lonely he'd been, even surrounded by people. I confessed that I had stopped believing someone could truly see me, not as a burden, not as a fixer, but as a woman, deserving of care and love. On the final morning of the trip, we walked the shoreline just after sunrise. He took my hand, not in a dramatic gesture, but with purpose. "I don't want to be just chapter in your story," he said softly. "I want to build something real with you." I squeezed his hand, the salty wind catching my hair. "I never expected this," I said. "You weren't in my plans." He chuckled. "You weren't in mine either. But maybe the best. Things aren't planned. Back in the city, life resumed at its pace. But we were different, stronger, more grounded. And though bills still arrived and responsibilities still weighed heavy, they didn't feel as crushing. Because now I had someone beside me. Not to fix everything, but to face it with me. I paid my rent on time that month, not just from the extra income the project had brought, but because I had found a renewed energy. I started budgeting better. I asked for a raise, something I'd never had the courage to do before, and got it. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. What we had wasn't perfect. There were days of miscommunication, moments of insecurity, but there was also patience and laughter, and a willingness to keep choosing each other. That made all the difference. His parents invited me to dinner a few weeks. Later, his mother hugged me with that same warmth from the party and whispered, "I knew when I saw you two that night. This was something special." I smiled, because she was right. Months passed, and what began as a desperate moment in an empty office had become the foundation of something beautiful. Love didn't rescue me. It reminded me of who I was, of what I deserved. It challenged me to open heart to trust again. And every time I looked at him, whether across a meeting table or from across the pillow, I felt it, not a fairy tale, but something better, real, earned, true. They say love shows up when you least expect it. I think that's only half true. Sometimes it's already there, quiet, steady, waiting for you to stop, looking through it and finally see it. And when you do it, changes everything. There was a moment, a few months later, when I caught my reflection in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she felt different, stronger, lighter, happier. It wasn't the kind of change that happens overnight. It was quiet, built from days of small decisions, tiny risks, and one unexpected connection that turned my world upside down. He and I had found a rhythm, one that wasn't perfect but was real. Wes still had our separate lives, jobs, obligations, family, but we showed up for each other in the ways that mattered. He made space for me, and I let myself take it without apology. One evening, after a long day, we sat together on my couch. No big plans, no special occasion, just us. He ached for my hand like he always did, and said, "You've changed everything for me." I smiled. "You reminded me of everything I forgot I could be." We didn't need fireworks or dramatic gestures. We had something better. Consistency, kindness, and a quiet passion that lived in the way he remembered how I took my tea or how I knew when. He needed silence instead of words. It wasn't about who saved who. It was about two people who had lived enough life to know what they didn't want and finally found in each other what they did. Some nights, I still think about how it all began with bills stacked on my table and a pit in my stomach. I never expected help, let alone something as extraordinary as love. But looking back, I realized that rock bottom was the foundation for something greater. He didn't come into my life to rescue me. He came to remind me that I could rescue myself and that maybe I didn't have to do it alone. This wasn't just a love story with a romantic touch. It was a story about trust, second chances, and how sometimes the most unexpected person can change your life, not with grand promises, but with the simple act of seeing you. And in the end, that was the most shocking truth of all. Not that I fell in love with my boss, but that for the first time in a long time I fell in love with myself.